You know, I mean, in particular with this show, it's a bit struggling because we always confuse to understand to what extent for an audience is interesting. And sometimes you feel that the interest is dropping. It's exactly when you think that maybe that's exactly when you need to be there. Yeah. Очень плохо слышу. Еле кто-то шепчет там. Вот я чую віддалені голоси. Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time television discussion in English explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm. And I am Natalia Humaniuk. And that's what we have for you tonight. What Ukraine and the world should do 2 weeks after the Russian aggression near Kerch, close to annexed Crimea. How is martial law affecting Ukrainian economy? What to expect from the cathedral when the bishop meets to create a united autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church in a week? And will Armenia vote in Nikol Pashinyan as Prime Minister, and what to expect from him? So I have great guests joining me tonight. That's Michael Butsurkiv, who is Global Affairs Analyst and Commentator, former OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine spokesperson, and Jim Brooke, who is an Editor-in-Chief of Ukraine Business News. And definitely we'll discuss how the martial law affects Ukrainian economy. So good evening. But I probably start with Michael. You just arrived in Ukraine. You've been, questioned by many international journalists, from CNN to others, on what's happening in Ukraine. Because, yes, it's already 2 weeks since the Russian aggression near the Azov Sea, and Ukraine has a martial law. So what are the most important issues, and what are people would like to understand?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be back here in the studio. I think I practically lived here when I was with the OSCE here almost every weekend. But no, it's got a heck of a lot of attention overseas, fallen off the news agenda a little bit. But coming back, I just arrived less than 24 hours ago. Life here seems to be quite calm. There's sugar and salt on the shelves. However, I think the sense I get from people here locally is not exactly the martial law they're talking about that much. It's more what's happening to the economy. I'm still hearing a lot about inflation, prices going up for things like heat, electricity, the brain drain, things like that. But I think this is one additional thing that a lot of people here feel they did not need to happen. The one thing I think we talked about to Jim about this as well is that what martial law does to the outside world, especially to investors, it scares them away. It does the same thing for tourists. So I don't know how much of the calculation this was when the Poroshenko administration decided to impose martial law. Secondly, there's still questions on why it didn't happen earlier in 2014 or during the forced annexation of Crimea. So these are questions that are also being asked by outside analysts. I get that a lot. And hopefully what's going to happen, of course, in the long term is that tensions are going to cool off in the Sea of Azov, that the economic lifeblood of those two ports is going to return, that the Russians will back off. Now, one more quick thing. We'll be all looking tomorrow because in Brussels there's going to be talks with foreign ministers about placing more sanctions in response to what happened in the Sea of Azov. The talking that I'm picking up is it's going to be on Ukrainian nationals who are based in the occupied Donbas region. So there's no doubt about it. The one thing that Putin only understands is economic pain, to him, to his cronies. So if the Europeans and the Americans can agree on imposing a lot more stricter sanctions, this, I think, will hold him back.
And Jim, so it's already 2 weeks, and I think it's already time, because the martial law is imposed for 1 month, not in the whole country, but in 10 regions. However, what impact it has?
The label is a turnoff for foreign investors. For us expats who live here, we ideally know the score and life has not changed one iota, no change at all. But if you're outside in London, Frankfurt, Berlin, New York, you may work for a company where the security officer says, no, you can't go to a country under martial law. And this has happened. There have been some companies where their officers have been told not to come here. So meetings are being pushed back into January after the New Year holiday. Investment, the risk issue, the risk quotient has notched up a little bit. Frankly, Ukraine will survive this, no problem. I just happened to spend last week in Egypt, which has been through martial law, which was like a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew. This will come and go. It's not a plus, but we always thought that the pre-election period would be a lull for business deals. A smart businessman or woman is not going to announce his or her project under a lame duck president. They want to know who the next president is, and that president can bless it, can cut the ribbon, whatever. So there's a lot of due diligence and research into joint ventures. We didn't expect a lot to be announced during December, January, February, March until we know who the next president is.
If you speak not just about the investors, but for instance, Ukraine is discussing IMF program currently, and these are the most significant things prior to the elections. Of course, there is always a security consideration somewhere behind. What was this threat really? Still, how it impacts on this kind of the relations?
Well, I think the IMF, World Bank, and the European Union move very quickly and very decisively to support Ukraine. The IMF said right off the bat that, martial law, no problem. World Bank trotted along a little bit behind. They're allied. And then the EU just went ahead and released the money. I think it's 500 million euros, which usually was supposed to be done after the IMF board meeting. The IMF board meeting will take place this coming week. So all three international financial institutions have been very decisive and very quick in supporting Ukraine.
How about the Western political leaders? Of course, there are always the discussion in Ukraine. People are speaking about these 50 shades of concern. Mm-hmm. However, there was clear support for Ukraine from NATO, from the Western leaders, when there was a discussion about the Russian threat. How is it now? How you can analyze the situation?
A couple of points. I think first of all is Ukraine did a very bad job in terms of explaining the need for martial law. Normally what would happen, you'd call ambassadors in and close the session, explain to them why this is being done, because as Jim said, it does have a knock-on effect internationally. As far as I know, that was not done. And I think they could have done a better job also explaining to their own people why this is now necessary. In terms of the reaction of the international community, well, I wouldn't be surprised if Ukrainian leaders felt very alone right now. A lot of rhetoric as soon as what happened in the Sea of Azov, a lot of strong rhetoric, but it wasn't followed up by action. Again, we may see more action tomorrow, but I think there's a real big concern in the world right now when thugs, heads of state, do illegal things, whether it's forcibly annexing territory, closing off international waters, as the Russians did, killing journalists in Turkey. The Saudis hacking a journalist to death. What's happening elsewhere in the world with China and the South China Sea, they're not seeing the consequences of these actions of going against the rule-based order. And that's a very, very big concern. I think just quickly, it was the UN Secretary General who said not long ago that maybe we're seeing the new normal in terms of states, authoritarian states, acting in a very harsh way.
I suggest we also listen to our talk to Michael Carpenter, who is Senior Director in Penn Biden Center and used to be the top official in the White House under the presidency of the Barack Obama, and is following Ukraine and in particularly all the security issues closely.
Well, I think the reaction so far has been good. I think the fact that Ukraine did not fire back on the Russian ship, was not an armed skirmish in the Black Sea, is actually a good thing, because it shows that Ukraine was calm and cool and that the Russian side was 100% responsible for the aggression. However, going forward, it is difficult for Ukraine to come up with a strategy, because in the maritime domain, Ukraine has a huge weakness and disadvantage as compared with Russia. And so going forward, I think what Ukraine needs to do better is explain the situation, especially with regards to the imposition of martial law, where I think the authorities have been a little bit slow to explain to their own public, but also to the international community, why they have adopted this martial law resolution. And then I think Ukraine needs to also work very hard with its partners to seek greater support, more pressure on Russia in the form of sanctions, and more military assistance.
Jim, in terms of the economy again, you said, like, as a life of the expert, nothing has changed. However, in practicalities, still the economy happens not just in the capital. It's all about all the ports, roads. Do you see that there are any issues also in such places like Mariupol, Berdyansk? Because that's where cargo is going. And also maybe you'll get to understand why those important from the economical point of view, the closure of the Azov Sea.
Yeah, well, martial law strikes chills down the spines of business people who think it will inflict on their property rights, and we're not seeing that yet. Now, the Sea of Azov is a special case. It's very clear that the current leadership of Russia wants to turn it into a Russian lake, and that's why they built the bridge too low. So it's 20% lower than before, and that's why they're now controlling access. It's unclear if enough international pressure will be brought to bear to force them to restore freedom of navigation. I asked the German ambassador on Wednesday, I said, there are proposals to boycott products from Novorossiysk. Novorossiysk is not only the only ice-free port in Russia, it is the busiest port of Russia, and it's 160 kilometers south of the bridge, which you have behind your shoulder. So a natural thing would be to say, we will boycott products in Novorossiysk, your number one port, unless you restore freedom of navigation. Freedom of shipping is not a natural human condition. It has been enforced by the U.S. Navy since 1945. The U.S. Navy is not going to go on the Sea of Azov. It can't fit under the bridge, and it's too shallow. But something has to be done to restore freedom of shipping, and the Russians don't want that. But let's see if the West does.
Michael, and what could be also done besides sanctions?
I think there's a number of things in the kind of toolbox. We always like to talk about we should have harsher sanctions and more targeted. The problem with sanctions is they can also hurt the other side. They have to be done in a very calibrated way. The other thing I'm seeing right now is there's not a big appetite right now in Europe for more sanctions, especially in countries where you have more populist governments, and secondly, where their economies are hurting. A lot of economies are hurting right now in Europe. I think at the end of the day, also what hurts, the other side are travel restrictions. Thirdly, what really hurts them and upsets them are controls to buy foreign property in places like London. In that regard, I think what needs to be done is a lot more controls in regards to these hidden LLCs, offshore companies where money is funneled, these kind of channels to launder or buy property in places like London. That would really hurt them. The one thing that Putin really, really hates again is financial targeted sanctions that either hurt him or his circle of cronies, because it makes it, of course, much more difficult for them to operate. One more quick thing, speaking of that bridge, a lot of people are saying that its construction is not very good, that it's a very rough sea there, the currents are tough. So if it does, for example, collapse or something happens, the Russians could use that as a pretext to blame the Ukrainians and then take further action, which means they will also need that land bridge as well, the Ukrainian coastline, to connect Crimea with the rest of Russia.
However, I would mention, because I'm not an architect and it's not up to me to assess, but we've been to Kerch this autumn, and yes, it was very interesting to look at the bridge. It's a solid construction where you see that a lot had been invested. So kind of they were building it for a while, at least you see from the amount of people, from the traffic, despite it's of course illegal. But speaking about also the Western reaction, especially during the days when we know what's going on in France and in Germany with the new leadership, of course we're looking at the US. That would be my also following questions. But we had a chance to talk to George Kent, who is US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, and he had been in Kiev this week, and we had a chance to talk to him.
European ships, whether they are civilian or military, have the right to, as Ambassador Haley at the UN said, go from one Ukrainian port to another Ukrainian port. That clearly is Ukraine's right under the 2003 agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and it's Ukraine's right under international law. So Russia, by preventing that, has violated bilateral agreements and international obligations. So that part is clear, that Ukraine has the right and Russia violated its obligations. Whether or not it is wise for a Ukrainian ship at any day or moment to try to force its way through is a different matter. Certainly we call on Russia to allow Ukrainian ships through. Right now there is a soft blockade, as people have been talking about, against commercial shipping in the Sea of Azov. Right after this attack against a Ukrainian ship, the Russians close the Kerch Strait and declare a Russian military exercise. So this weekend it was bad weather, now it's a Russian military exercise. These are just excuses. And so we call on Russia to allow ships to go back and forth through the Kerch Strait.
What still we can expect from the American leadership?
Well, just a quick thing about my German ambassador. He responded to me asking about boycotting products, Novorossiysk. Don't be too aggressive, it will backfire on you. He wasn't saying this directly to me, but to Ukraine. So he's taking very soft lines, and he said publicly, in Europe we're fighting to preserve the sanctions that exist, and we don't want additional sanctions. You can say that's maybe a defeatist line, but that's what the German ambassador here said in a public meeting. You're fresh out of, what do you think of the U.S.?
Yeah, well, look, I've been looking at a number of issues recently. I was recently in Asia, China, Bangladesh, dealing with the Rohingya issue in Myanmar. I think what we're seeing right now happening in the world, including here in Ukraine, and the lack of U.S. resolve, lack of U.S. action, is starting the after effects of the U.S. abdicating its role as as the world's policeman, as the enforcer of things like sanctions. I think it's sad to say, but what we're going to see with this U.S. kind of inaction or silence is more aggression from rogue states, from authoritarian leaders like Saudi Arabia, like Russia, like China, because the U.S. used to be the main enforcer of the world-based order, where rules were rules and you don't break them, and if you do, there are going to be harsh consequences.
I should also remind to you and to our audience that we have 24 Ukrainian sailors who are, according to Geneva Convention, war prisoners. They are in Russia as well, and that's up to more 70 of the political prisoners in the next Crimea. And we had a chance to talk to the wife of Yuri Budzilo, who is a midshipman and was on one of the ships.
I called him and could not get through. I knew immediately something was wrong, because intuition tells you when something is not right with your loved ones. And then when I turned on the news, I saw what was happening. I didn't tell our mother anything on November the 25th or 26th, his sister says. Only on the 27th. Mother's heart is weak. She has high blood pressure, and she would not have survived such news if she didn't know that he's okay, that he's not injured, that he's alive.
So you can find on our webpage en.hromadske.ul the full version of the report about the families of the Ukrainian sailors, currently kept also mainly in Moscow. You can watch and read and understand that there is a huge human aspect behind that, and as well there are more analyses of what's happening to those people. While I'll address this issue to Michael, looking back at also your experience at OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine, this issue of the political prisoners and negotiation in Russia, we feel always that there is very little Ukraine can do, and there are still, after so many years, no really efficient way to get the people back.
No, Russia doesn't extradite its own people, and it certainly doesn't like giving back prisoners. When I first heard that they're being detained, that they're going to be put through legal trials, this to me seemed like it's going to be a long, drawn-out affair. And we hope to God that the same fate doesn't happen to them as happened to some other, Ukrainian political prisoners held by Russia. So I think what we may see happen here, especially bearing in mind that elections aren't that far down the road, is that Russia will probably use them as bargaining chips, human bargaining chips, to make Poroshenko look weak.
Yeah, it's nothing new. There was an old Soviet trick of the Soviets would create a problem and then they'd solve it, and everyone would say, oh, thank you so much, Moscow. You solved the problem that you created in the first place.
So with that, thanks for this discussion on this topic, but I would like to stay with us, because we're heading also to a rather very interesting issues for also our foreign audience to explain, because behind all this buzz, very important though, on the martial law, we should explain that already next week, next Saturday on the 15th of December, there would be the meeting of the cathedral where the bishops would meet, and there is a chance that Ukraine finally would get its united autocephalous Orthodox Church. And we have with us Archimandrite Kirill Hovorun, who is a professor at Loyola Marymount University and probably one of the best Ukrainian experts on the issue. And good evening, Kirill.
Good evening. Good evening.
Kirillo, so probably explain to our foreign audience again what to expect, what we need to watch out, and what are the most significant issues which might happen next week.
Well, indeed, next week on Saturday, December the 15th, we expect a council of a new Ukrainian church to be convened in Kiev in the ancient cathedral of St. Sophia. And this event will put the kind of full stop to the long-lasting process which began at least in April this year, the process of establishing an autocephalous church in Ukraine. A series of events preceded this council. Therefore, the council is really important because it finalizes a long-lasting process. It's, in a few words, it's a gathering of the bishops from all the Ukrainian Orthodox churches. All of them, those who want to join this enterprise, this new church, they come together to this gathering, which we call council, and they will vote for a new primate of the church. They will discuss the statute of the new church. And as a follow-up of this council, the Church of Constantinople, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, will eventually grant the Thomas of autocephaly to the newly established church.
And Kirill, what are the things to look? Where are the debates now? I know you were writing because there are, of course, besides the whole issue between the Moscow or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev Patriarchy, impact of the Russian Orthodox Church on anything that's happening. There are also some difference between what the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kiev Patriarchy, which we name it this way, is thinking, and as well what the Patriarch Bartholomew in Constantinople is thinking. So where we have to look on what is not yet decided, what are the where we need to, what would be might be a surprise or at least a new thing for us to know.
Right. Well, the scenarios for the newly established church change all the time. The initial scenario was that the bishops of the three Ukrainian churches would come together on their own initiative, and they would establish a new church. So it was expected that it would be the initiative of the bishops themselves. Later on, it turned out that this scenario was not feasible. And the Ecumenical Patriarchate decided to take an initiative to call the council. And as a matter of fact, this decision was taken at the recent session of the Synod of the Church of Constantinople, which decided to, which actually discussed the statute of the new church, suggested this statute for the discussion by the council in December, the upcoming council, and decided also to convene the council. So nowadays, the new scenario says that it is now an initiative of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And indeed, all the bishops in Ukraine have received an invitation letter from the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, who invited them to come to St. Sophia to take part in the council. So we expect that most of the bishops who received these invitation letters will come, and they will discuss the agenda which was suggested by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Well, it is also important to mention here that according to the invitation letter of the Ecumenical Patriarch, there will be present the President of Ukraine. So he will attend the council, not of course as a member of the council, but as a sort of observer. The letter says that his role will be ordinary, so he will follow also the session of the council. Also said that not every detail of the council has been agreed upon as of yet. There are some issues which are still pending, still being in discussion, like for instance whether there will be a participation of lay in the council. The Patriarchate of Kiev, one of the participants in the upcoming council, recently decided that this will be a council of bishops only, so that the lay people and priests, that is to say, the representatives of all the strata within the church, would only be observers, effectively, in the council, while the Ecumenical Patriarchate insists that they should be fully fledged members of the council and they should have a right to vote. So this issue is being discussed still. We hope that the decision eventually by the Ecumenical Patriarchate will prevail, and the council will be really represent the broad constituents within the Ukrainian churches. Another issue which is being discussed nowadays is what kind of voting process it will be, whether it will be a closed or an open voting process, meaning that the bishops will vote, or the members will be, if they will be also lay people and priests, whether they will vote openly so that everyone will see who votes for whom, or they will be secret voting votes. In this case, the voting process will be more fair and will allow the members of the council to express more freely themselves. So it is, there is a disagreement between Constantinople and the Patriarchate of Kiev on this issue, because the Patriarchate of Kiev, it seems, according to its decisions, decided to proceed to the open voting, while the Ecumenical Patriarchate wants the voting to be closed, so that to enable the members of the council to vote more free and fairly.
Kirill, thanks a lot for this detailed and nuanced explanation. We will definitely follow, and we are looking forward to have Kirill in this studio as well. I suggest and encourage all our audience to go to our webpage, en.hromadske.ua, because we do have a very extensive coverage and with the explanation what's really happening with this issue. Probably my reactions, we all have to become religious experts unexpectedly in 2018. How significant is this issue, how it's seen from outside?
Well, I think it's very significant. I'm a Protestant, so I'm a little bit out of it. But very interesting analogy in the U.S. After our revolution against the British in 1776, we had a state church. It was the Anglican Church. And if you read in history the process of creating a national church in the United States that was separate from British control, it's a very interesting experience, and a lot of churches closed and sort of went over to a different denomination or something. But we went through this. It's a forgotten footnote of history of 250 years ago. But we got rid of British imperial control of what had been our state church and created an independent church.
The one amazing thing about this, it's getting an enormous amount of attention outside. A lot of international journalists have written about this unification of the churches with the split with the Russian church. A couple of quick political notes here, I think, is one for Poroshenko. It's an enormous political win. He put a lot of political capital in this. He managed to do what no other Ukrainian leader has done. Whether this will translate into votes for him down the road, I don't know, but it must be said that church leaders in Ukraine happen to have the highest trust levels of all kinds of institutions here. For Putin, this is a huge loss. He took a big PR blow with this, and I will not rule out some skullduggery up the road, them creating some sort of trouble here to make it look like it's not a very smooth democratic process. It remains to be seen, but obviously, church unity is one of those things that has evaded Ukraine for a long time, and I think we all hope that this will go very smoothly in the next few days.
And yeah, I should also say that, of course, it's historical. It's something which really happened after, 500 years, 1,000 years. Therefore, I think we'll definitely look close to that. And I think many of us, not really, I would say, underestimated the issue. But yeah, I also suggest that we all follow. And beside that, I would like to draw to a different topic, because as Hromadske International reporting on the whole region, I'd like also to have your reaction on that. We can't miss the story of Armenia. New Armenia is voting for a new prime minister, might be Nikol Pashinyan, who have come to power after the peaceful protests, which were very, very active in spring. And so it was a democratic procedure. We know that still there is just 48% people who were coming to the polls, voters, according to the chairman of the Central Electoral Commission, that was Tigran Mukuchan, said. We should say it was less than it was previously. I also should say that what is interesting that so far the polls had been closed a bit more than an hour and a half ago. Yet there are no preliminary results yet. There are no these kind of polls. However, we were looking before that My Step Alliance, that is a party of Nikol Pashinyan, had chances, according to the previous surveys, to get more than 60% of the votes. And as I understand, we should have already online with us Armen Minasyant, who is a board member, Secretariat, Article 3, Human Rights Center. Armen, good evening. Do you hear us? I would ask again to say, Armeniak, do you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. So let us know this is a historic day for Armenia, what we should know about the elections today. Do you know anything about the preliminary results? So what the audience need to know?
Thank you a lot for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to join up today's evening on Hromadske and to share a bit what's happening around Armenia. So as of now, we just started the vote counting process, which is going to last probably over the night. And as of now, we only have the result of the turnout among the population. So it is only 48.63%, which is a bit low if I compare it to the results that we had during the last year parliamentary elections, where the results were around 61%. Nevertheless, the key idea behind the elections itself, the snap parliamentary elections, it is much more about just putting clearly getting the vision and the values of the Velvet Revolution, the peaceful, non-violent Velvet Revolution in Armenia, which took place actually in April and May of 2018, right at the place and to get already to the parliament. So the parliamentary snap elections, they have been manipulated for some reasons by different political parties before the elections. Nevertheless, the elections, the snap parliamentary elections, are truly historical. And in my personal perception, they are going to be historical overall for the entire post-Soviet region. Having said that, I basically mean that the elections are truly democratic, absolutely transparent, open, fair, and the results are not going to create any type of manipulation among the population of Armenia. So they are going to reflect itself the general vision within the society. And probably the elections itself and today's like the procedure and the process of elections, both the pre-campaign and also what's happening up right now, like the vote casting, all the process of citizen participation, the civic participation in the elections, they are all going to indicate how important was the revolution for Armenia to put the country back on a truly democratic tracks. On a tracks there, the society and the citizens and the government are living in a harmony. When the elections itself mean not just going to the polling station and casting a vote, but no, like having a possibility to choose among the political variety of the country. And generally speaking, I mean, the elections in Armenia, like no matter how the results would be, lots of people are arguing now that everything is very predictable, that the results are easy to guess, even for the foreigner, for an external observer. Nevertheless, I mean, the elections itself, the importance is much more, in the sense that this is really a first occasion since 1991, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, then the Armenian people voted for exit the Soviet Union. It is actually the first time ever in last almost 30 years that Armenian citizens are going to the polling stations. They participate in truly democratic and transparent elections, which are taking place in completely democratic environment, with no electoral fraud, with no vote buying, with no corruption cases, with no oppression, and without any intimidation towards the citizens' vote.
Armenak, my question would be that, I think I don't want to mislead our audience because we showed some figures, and those was the figures of the preliminary kind of preliminary polls, not on the elections date, but earlier, where the chances of the Nikol Pashinyan party, My Step Alliance, were really high, beyond 60%. We don't want, obviously, to speculate. Still, and any analyst would say that his party is now currently dominating. What you would say, is there any real political opposition today to Pashinyan? And he was in power for about 6 months. So how we can also assess what he had achieved? Because there is always, after some kind of, even if it's a peaceful and velvet revolution, there is always some kind of the disappointment. And if it's already an democratic leader, he should be kept accountable also on what he does to the economy, what he does on a lot of other issues. So what do you say? Who is the balance to Pashinyan? Does the Armenian opposition exist, and what are the most important issues for him?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually, when it comes to the opposition in Armenia, because even for us now living in Armenia and dealing basically with the civil society, with students, with political parties, and generally with the academia, like we are always coming up to the question, do we really, as of now, have an opposition in the country? And my reply would be both yes and no. It depends how we try to understand the role of opposition in a country. Prime Minister Pashinyan, like he has previously had the experience of like being a political opposition for the last 2 decades, almost 20 years, in different capacities, leading the street protests, afterward leading up a newspaper, afterwards getting to the parliament, leading the entire Velvet Revolution. So he had an extensive experience as an opposition leader. As of now, he's trying a new head of the prime minister of a government, and he's doing it for the last 7-8 months. Nevertheless, when it comes to the existence of opposition, it's a good question. I believe our political system is now in a turmoil as well. We definitely need a strong political opposition, which is going to bring not only like slogans and just stating and shouting as loud as possible that we are the opposition, the only existing opposition in the country, but truly a political party which can bring a new political brand, a party which can bring a new political context and content to the society. So as of now, for these elections, it's very difficult to say. I mean, we have obviously a party participating, the representatives of the previous regime, which was in power for the last 20 years and was majorly described by the international outlets as an authoritarian regime, the Republican Party of Armenia, which is publicly stating that they are adversary of Nikol Pashinyan, the only existing and functioning opposition. But when we look to their campaign as an opposition, the campaign was built up only in indicating what Pashinyan has not done yet. And the other political parties, we have like in total 11 political parties participating in the elections. I mean, the other like 8-9 parties, like the thing is that, they are balancing, they are voting around. It's very difficult. I mean, in the situation to stand up and to say like, I'm against the revolution. I mean, Pashinyan is leading still the revolution bloc. The people like who were on the streets, like these people there on the photo, like now running for the parliament, many of them. And that creates a natural, organic situation. Whenever you say like, I'm against Pashinyan, it means you are against the revolution. And, it rings the bell at some extent that some of the people are not finding them comfortable, even though they have like a differences with the views and visions. Nevertheless, the good point and fair point here is to state that the political system in Armenia is getting to the better shape. Like the titans, like this old-fashioned, like the last Mohicans of Armenian politics, like the parties which were in the parliament for the last couple of decades, they are leaving the stage. And we are getting a completely new parliamentary setup. So, and generally, also outside of the parliament, because most probably we are going to have up to 4 parties, and the preliminary results are indicating that up to 4 parties would be in the parliament. Nevertheless, the political culture is changing. So for the first time, we got a party which was for the social democrat ideas and like manipulate, not only like stating, but generally prescribing all the program around the social democrat ideas. We had completely liberal parties. We have a nationalist parties. We have a pro-European party, like publicly campaigning for the closer ties with EU. We have a radical party. We have a conservative party participating. So basically the huge political diversity is presented over the elections. And for the voters, for the electorate, like they have a possibility now to choose among the brands, which is like a very big achievement at all.
Okay, so thanks a lot for that analysis, and we'll look forward to know about the results. Thanks a lot for being with us live from Yerevan, and I also should say you can follow our Twitter and all our newswire to see the results. But as well, my colleague from Hromadske traveled to Armenia to make these in-depth stories. What people really think, as Ukrainians, we are curious what's happening after the revolution. So you've both were in the region.
Yeah.
What's your reaction?
Well, it sounds great from the report that we just got. And I covered the Armenian elections 5 years ago for president against Sarkisian. And it was so clear. There was massive opposition, big rallies, and a fair amount of fraud. It was not the Armenia that this gentleman has just described. So this sounds like good news.
And that's good news also for the economy in the region. I mean, in the
Yeah.
Caucasus.
Yeah, no, I think Georgia and Armenia are pretty close, and they obviously have huge problems with Azerbaijan. But and it'll be interesting to see where they go vis-a-vis Russia, which is a very complicated issue because they depend on Russia to protect them from these areas, but then the Russians are playing a double game and selling billions of dollars of military equipment to these areas, so they're in a difficult neighborhood.
A couple of quick thoughts came to mind here. Very good analysis, by the way, is that voting against the leader who was swept in by a revolution is almost like voting against the revolution. It reminded me of Poroshenko, actually, because he was a man on Maidan. He was up there on stage. He said great things that a lot of people believed in. But as I said on CNN recently in my op-ed piece, is that I think what happens a lot to these leaders is they get out of touch. They become part of the Davos elite. They do things like buy property, expensive property in Portugal, and then they get caught, or take secret vacations and get caught on that. So they have to be very careful on delivering on promises. And quickly, secondly, is that I think what we're happening to see, especially as these waves of populism happen, are more one-term leaders. After Friday, a lot of people are now saying Trump isn't going to be a one-term leader. My Prime Minister in Canada, Justin Trudeau, may not make the next election next year. And we're seeing that happening in Europe a fair bit as well. So what I'm saying is that longevity isn't there, what we used to see. I think Angela Merkel may be the last of those in this European continent that we may see has lasted election after election after election.
So thanks a lot for this discussion. I think we covered a lot of issues important to Ukraine and the region, but we see how today the world is connected. That was Michael Butsurkiev, who is a global affairs analyst, and Jim Brook, who is editor-in-chief of Ukraine Business News, you would like to read as well. And my name is Natalia Humenyuk, so I'll be with you again next Sunday or the other Sunday with the Sunday show, but follow us on Twitter and Facebook, search Hromadske International. Sign up for our weekly update that is on our webpage en.hromadske.ua. There are way more stories to read if you would like to understand Ukraine and the region. So with that, thank you and goodbye.